Right, so the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, 4 days from Friday the 24th of November through until Monday the 27th, was broken within an hour by the IDF as Palestinians waving white flags, believing the ceasefire had begun, rightfully, came out of hiding only to be shot at, with 2 people being killed. A reprehensible act for which Israel needs to be held to account over. But of course Keir Starmer said a ceasefire would embolden Hamas, didn't he? Not the IDF. Hamas have thus far followed the terms of the ceasefire, even delayed the release of a second batch of hostages until Israel behaved themselves and did likewise. Not a sign that Starmer is backing the right side here, but why did Israel think they could get away with breaching the terms of the ceasefire? Why did they do so at all? And what are Gazans actually doing right now if they aren't all Hamas and being emboldened, as Keir Starmer said they would be? Right, so we're on day 3 of the ceasefire between Israel and Palestine. The hope that this would turn into something longer and more meaningful, however, has been shaken. Not by Hamas, though, but by Israel, who chose to shoot at white flag waving Palestinians coming out of hiding who decided to try and return to their homes. That was why Israel broke the ceasefire within an hour, because they didn't want that happening. If the Gazans had headed southwards like Israel wanted them to, or demanding they do, still itself a war crime, it is forced displacement after all, then they probably wouldn't have been shot at. Not that that excuses the ceasefire being breached by Israel anyway. Israel do not want Gazans heading north. We know this. The order to evacuate and move south was not only illegal, but also ridiculous, and not without Israel still targeting people moving south whilst they were at it. Convoys hit and more people killed. Every target in Gaza City in the north, where the people have been told to leave, has been attacked, haven't they? Hospitals, schools, refugee camps, people's homes, all attacked and blown up and bombed, all in the name of driving out and targeting Hamas. The IDF planting evidence along the way. It's blatant, and we shouldn't shy away from saying that now. Planting evidence. I mean, weapons caches behind big magnets in MRI machines. Come off it. And in schools as well. Tunnels that turned out to be water tanks under hospitals. Enough of it. Their excuses are insulting, but equally, forcing people to move south was never going to expose Hamas either. Israel makes so much of Hamas hiding behind civilians as their excuse to kill lots of Gazan civilians, to excuse their actions, but they'll have headed south as well, won't they, Hamas? And presumably that's why Israel have carried on targeting people in the south of Gaza as well. But back to the here and now. Gazans coming out of hiding, of believing a ceasefire is in place. Well, they just wanted to go home. Why, if things are over, or so they hope? Why, if we're hoping things are going to become more permanent and peaceful, are they not allowed to head back towards Gaza City? Why did the IDF shoot at them, even under ceasefire terms? Because that's what they were doing. The only reasonable explanation is that Israel had no intention of letting these people ever return north. I've said from the beginning of all of this that this is a land grab in the making. Israel, figuring their loyal, bought and paid for friends in the West will cover for them, as usual, and say, commit genocide and seize more land for settlers. Force the Gazans out into the Sinai, take the Gaza Strip that they've occupied for decades anyway, and just make it part of Israel. Then they can concentrate on the West Bank next, and presumably the Golan Heights they stole from Syria as well. This event got picked up here by Sky News, surprisingly, explaining why these people were moving north, because it wasn't all about just going home for the sake of going home. So many homes have been reduced to rubble as a result of the bombing, but of course there are many people in the north who couldn't leave. Families got split up. This was about trying to reunite with them, possibly at refugee camps like Jabalia, possibly because they were patients or worked at the various hospitals that had been targeted, unable to move south, and medical staff refusing to abandon people who couldn't move. A Sky News cameraman on the scene was able to get audio out saying that as these crowds of men, but also women and children came out, there was direct shooting towards the crowd and into the crowd. He spoke of witnessing people being shot. At least 2 were killed, and he himself narrowly escaped being shot whilst he was filming, again showing the disregard Israel have for the press too. Israel later admitted they will shoot anyone who tries to return to Gaza City, and that's why the ceasefire was broken. That needs explaining further, because there sure as hell is no justifying that. Of course, when there is next to no international scrutiny, they can happily admit such things, because they are so used to getting away with it every time after all. Sky later interviewed Netanyahu mouthpiece and former UK-Israeli ambassador Mark Regev about this, because, let's face it, he's always available, isn't he? And he said Hamas were forcing these people to move, and so that's why they got shot. There was a ceasefire in place, dumbass. And actually Hamas have respected it, even held Israel to account over it. But I'll come back to that in a moment. Let's digress from the ceasefire breaches of Israel for a moment, though, because if we fixate on that, you could be forgiven for thinking that no good has come from this ceasefire. Hostages held by both sides have been released. The numbers that I've picked up on this morning, they varied from media outlet to media outlet, depending on which one you ask. But basically, 50 Israeli hostages held by Hamas and 150 Palestinian hostages held by Israel have been released, or are in the process of being released. And yes, they were hostages, not prisoners, as the media insist on referring to them. They consisted of women and children, mostly convicted of nothing. So if they haven't been convicted of anything, they aren't prisoners, are they? They're hostages. Why are you holding them otherwise? Of those alleged to have committed crimes, including kids, the crime committed was throwing stones. Let's not forget that Israel's demented defence minister Bezalel Smotrich has instigated a shoot-to-kill policy in response to stone throwing now. So I suppose these kids are the lucky ones, and that at least they still breathe. They got incarcerated instead of getting killed. Or at least that's the case for now, anyway. You don't live to get old in Gaza. That's why half the population are under 18, after all. Israel has some 2,000 Palestinians in detention, i.e. hostages. They call it administrative detention, and under this they can lock anyone up for however long they like. They don't have to provide a shred of evidence justifying it, and don't even need to tell the person who is being locked up why they are being locked up. But sure, go on, tell me this isn't an apartheid state. Well, Israel have released 150-ish of their hostages, but before doing so, they sent the IDF around to the homes of their families to warn them against celebrating publicly, because they might place them back in administrative detention, presumably, if they dare show any glad tidings and emotion. Of course, our media are full of images of Israeli hostages being reunited with their families, and that's great. They're allowed to show that. They're allowed to show the tears of joy there. But why should Israel get away with clamping down on Palestinians being allowed to do likewise? All of this ultimately adds up to this ceasefire not really being a ceasefire, because there's no sign that Israel are prepared to lay down their arms and pull out of Gaza. Not if they are killing people attempting to return north. This is the reality of the humanitarian pause. This is what Starmer wanted, and still people are dying. Starmer said Hamas would be emboldened by a ceasefire, but Israel have been emboldened during this pause. It isn't even humanitarian when people are still being killed, and the world still won't call it out. What are Gazans doing during this ceasefire then? Are they getting emboldened? No. You want to know what they're doing? Well, they're burying their dead. Now they finally have a chance to do so without getting killed themselves. The bodies haven't been left out for so long. Disease is now spreading amongst these people as decay sets in. Families are trying to reunite with each other. Injured people able to finally leave are using this time to do so. Families are surveying the damage to their homes and property into their lives. And these are the people Keir Starmer fears a ceasefire will encourage violence amongst. The man is twisted. He'll never hold Israel to account. He owes the lobby too much. I mentioned Hamas holding Israel accountable for their actions a moment ago. There's a really good example of this happening in practice, and it just goes to show how unused Israel are at having to deal with Hamas on a level playing field, looking at them in the eye, so to speak. The second group of hostages that Hamas were due to release has been delayed because of Israeli breaches to the ceasefire, and they listed all the reasons justifying their actions in this, which all involve multiple further breaches of the ceasefire agreement by Israel. First, they highlighted that example of the two Palestinians being killed trying to return to Gaza City. Apparently one was injured and bleeding on the floor, but people were prevented from reaching them because they get shot at. The agreement said that women and children would be selected for release by Israel based on how long they had been held for. Israel didn't do that. The IDF visiting families to stop them celebrating was considered a breach of the ceasefire agreement as well. Israel had no right to do that. Along with Palestinians on foot being denied the freedom to return north, so were aid trucks heading the same way. Israel also breached the no-fly zone on day one of the ceasefire. And despite Hamas hostages having been treated well, Israel evidently did not show the same courtesy. In point of fact, Hamas have observed the terms of the ceasefire completely, and Israel blatantly haven't. Israel have a history of not observing ceasefires because they get away with it, because the world always turns a blind eye to them. Well, the world isn't doing that now anymore, and leaders continuing to do so will suffer for it as people are better informed than they'd like us to be. A proper, meaningful ceasefire will not embolden Hamas. They have shown themselves now, as they have in the past, to be compliant in ceasefires. That isn't excusing what they've done, but you can't excuse what Israel has done either, and is still doing, by not complying itself. It is Israel that becomes emboldened by not being held to account, and if the world would stop giving them a free pass all the time, we might actually get somewhere in the Middle East. That definitely includes those self-declared Zionists without qualification like Keir Starmer. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did want content out daily. Please do have your say on this video in the comments below and be part of the conversation. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where Keir Starmer has been jumping through hoops, flip-flopping over his actual ceasefire position as he finds himself increasingly on the wrong side of history, as per usual. And I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.